trashy pulp novels of the world have anything to offer? Are bestsellers all they're hyped up to be? The Terrible Book Club explores whether or not you really can judge a book by its cover or its ridiculous synopsis. If you've ever seen a book and thought, ugh, who's reading this? We probably are.
Hello and welcome to episode 110 of the Terrible Book Club. I'm Chris, and this is Paris.
Hello, Jesus Christ. Has it really been 109 episodes before? Jesus Christ. Sorry.
It's been 110. This is number 110.
Yeah, there have been 109 before today, is my point.
And now there is being 110.
Yeah, yes.
This time we read the 1776 Commission report by 24 people and assorted aides appointed by the Trump administration. There's a whole bunch of people at the end here, but
I'm going to read it. I'm going to read all their names. I'm going to do it.
Like right now? Or
yeah, let's do it.
Okay. Well, it was rushed to the internet in the waning days of the Trump administration in an effort by the right-wing conservative administration to push back against liberal left-wing criticism of how American history has traditionally been told, in particularly by the 1619 Project, a series of articles and podcasts and other media that was done by the New York Times, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yes, correct.
And like people associated in writing for them, you could say. And you could tell it's kind of a petty passive-aggressive thing because, you know, it was called the 1619 Project, so they used, we're the 1776 Commission. It's just, it's like, you know, when Sum 41 came out after Blink-182, and you're like, you guys, we know what you're doing. Like, you just thought word and number was how you did. No, it's get your own thing.
Well, the 1776 Commission report was created by Larry P. Arnn. That's two N's on Arnn. Carol Swain, Matthew Spalding, Phil Bryant, Jerry Davis, Michael Ferris, Gay Hart Gaines. Wow, sorry, I haven't actually read the list before. Gay space Hart, H-A-R-T, Gay Hart Gaines, John Gibbs, Mike Gonzalez, Victor Davis Hanson, Charles Kessler, Peter Kirsanow, Thomas Lindsay, Bob McEwen, Ted Ryan, Julie Strauss. Ex officio members include Michael Pompeo, former Secretary of State, Christopher C. Miller, former Acting Secretary of Defense, I think, David L. Bernhardt, former Secretary of the Interior, Ben Carson, Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, Mitchell M. Zayas, Dr. Zayas, Acting Secretary of Education.
Bye.
Yeah, Dr. Zayas. I also think that this person is a former Acting Secretary of Education. Brooke Rollins, Assistant to the President for Domestic Policy, probably also no longer employed, I'm not sure. Doug Holscher, Assistant to the President for Intergovernmental Affairs. And then Adam Honeysett, Designated Federal Officer. And then just a list of people who helped prepare it, including William Bach, Alexandra Campana, Ariella Campana, and all right, not sure. Did they just get like a pair of twins to help with editing? That's kind of weird. Joshua Charles, Brian Morgenstern, Macy Mount, Mackenzie Snow, and Alec Torres. It took all these people.
Yeah,
all
Paris,
these people.
Now, you listeners here might say, like, wow, that's a lot of people. That they probably got a lot of ground covered. It was probably a large report with a lot of things to say. No, this is like a 30-page term paper that you throw in at the end of a college course that you were kind of trying to pass, so your GPA didn't completely tank, so you had to turn in something tomorrow.
Well, before we get too far, let's tell people what we do and give some warnings for today. I would say content warnings up first. Warnings for today include American politics and racism. So if you don't want to engage with political stuff right now, maybe listen to this episode another time, or also never. Never is fine.
Yeah.
We're going to be talking about conservative versus liberal American interpretation of U.S. history. So, of course, there's going to be a lot about race relations, white supremacy, etc. So if those things are not your jam today, please find something else to listen to. On this show, what we normally do is we choose a book or a report or a play, some kind of written ephemera that we think will be bad.
Scrawlings on a bathroom wall.
Yeah.
In a gas station bus stop.
That's going to be like episode 685 when we've just like run out of ideas. So anyway, we choose something that we think
Your uncle's Facebook post is coming soon to Terrible Book Club.
I mean, honestly, we'd read that. I mean, we read Woman Worship, which might have actually been a series of tweets disguised as poetry.
Yes.
Anyhow, we find something that we think is going to be bad, and we make this initial judgment based on its title, summary, cover, or a combination of those things. Sometimes we read things that friends, listeners, or patrons recommend. So typically we do the opposite of what review shows and what most book readers do. We choose things we think we're not going to like, and then we read them, and we discuss whether our premise was correct. So we talk about whether the thing was actually as bad as we thought and how or why it was that way. And a lot of the time this results in a disappointing read that's also hilarious. Although once in a while we do end up liking the thing that we thought we'd hate. So it's always kind of an interesting experiment each time. We decided to read this just because I remember it was published on Martin Luther King Jr. Day. You know, Trump was I think his last day in office was 5 days away or something. And I just remember it being kind of the death fart of this administration, and seeing all these rebuttals against it, and I was like, God damn, what is in that report that's inspiring so much vitriol and pushback from scholars and historians? I was just really surprised at all of the claims folks were making about how bad it was. So I was like, look, Chris, it's 40 pages. We can slot this in when we don't have time for something else. And so here we are, months later. We have read
always
this.
Late to the party, fashionably late, Paris.
Well, and I also think it's important to read things that you don't agree with, it's important not to just take kind of criticism at face value and not actually read the thing someone's criticizing yourself. Of course, if something was a massive work, it would be pretty impossible. But this isn't even 40 full pages, I think. Some of it's
appendices as
it's
full part of the thing.
Yeah, so it's actually 20 pages that's about U.S. history, and then the other 20 pages are appendices and discussion questions and things of that nature. So 20 pages, all of U.S. history. Go. All right.
Okay, a bunch of people came over. There were already people here, and then there was a bunch of fights with people that were still here and people that were still at the other place. And some forts came down, and tea in the harbor.
Oh wow, you skipped over a lot there.
Hats.
Oh no! God.
And then they kept going west. And one guy bought a bunch of land for $400 or something. Didn't that happen?
Are you talking about the Louisiana Purchase?
Something like that. Yeah, right?
Yes.
Anyway, and then there was a war again. Then there was a war again. Then there was another war again. And then, I don't know, New York, what a town. And then...
Wow. Okay.
What else?
Civil rights.
That's it.
Civil rights movement? Toss that in there.
We can't talk about that. This report says that we shouldn't really worry about it. It's fine now. Everything is fine.
Oh, right.
Don't worry about it.
Racism was over in 1965. Thanks.
Yes.
That's anyway. So
how dare you bring up something not nice that happened, Paris?
Oh, yeah.
We'll get to that. I was trying to do only the nice parts. That's what they want me to do.
All right, so since this is a federally commissioned report, it doesn't really have a summary or a back of the book thing I can read. So instead, I'm going to read you a portion of the executive order that established the commission and the report from November 2nd of 2020. You may think, wow, November 2nd, 2020, that sure is only 2.5 months before this was released. And you are correct. All right, so this was the intent of the project as explained by Donald J. Trump. The American founding envisioned a political order in harmony with the design of the laws of nature and of nature's God, seeing the rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness as embodied in and sanctioned by natural law and its traditions. The formation of a republic around these principles marked a clear departure from previous forms of government, securing rights through a form of government that derives its legitimate power from the consent of the governed. Throughout its national life, a republic's exploration of the full meaning of these principles has led it through the ratification of a constitution, civil war, the abolition of slavery, Reconstruction, and a series of domestic crises and world conflicts. Those events establish a clear historical record of an exceptional nation dedicated to the ideas and ideals of its founding. Against this history, in recent years, storm clouds forming behind me, a series of polemics grounded in poor scholarship has vilified our founders and our founding. Despite the virtues and accomplishments of this nation, many students are now taught in school to hate their own country and to believe that the men and women who built it were not heroes, but rather villains. This radicalized view of American history lacks perspective, obscures virtues, twists motives, ignores or distorts facts, and magnifies flaws, resulting in the truth being concealed and history disfigured. Failing to identify, challenge, and correct this distorted perspective could fray and ultimately erase the bonds that knit our country and culture together. The recent attacks on our founding have highlighted America's history related to race. These one-sided and divisive accounts too often ignore or fail to properly honor and recollect the great legacy of the American national experience. Our country's valiant and successful effort to shake off the curse of slavery and to use the lessons of that struggle to guide our work toward equal rights for all citizens in the present. Viewing America as an irredeemably and systemically racist country cannot account for the extraordinary role of the great heroes of the American movement against slavery and for civil rights. A great moral endeavor that, from Abraham Lincoln to Martin Luther King Jr., was marked by religious fellowship, goodwill, generosity of heart, an emphasis on our shared principles, and an inclusive vision for the future. As these heroes demonstrated, the path to a renewed and confident national unity is through a rediscovery of a shared identity rooted in our founding principles. A loss of national confidence in these principles would place rising generations in jeopardy of a crippling self-doubt that could cause them to abandon faith in the common story that binds us to one another across our differences. Without our common faith in the equal right of every individual American to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, authoritarian visions of government and society could become increasingly alluring alternatives to self-government based on the consent of the people. Thus, it is necessary to provide America's young people access to what is genuinely inspiring and unifying in our history, as well as to the lessons imparted by the American experience of overcoming great national challenges. This is what makes possible the informed and honest patriotism that is essential for a successful republic. A restoration of American education grounded in the principles of our founding that is accurate, honest, unifying, inspiring, and ennobling, and embiggening, must ultimately succeed at the local level. Parents and local school boards must be empowered to achieve greater choice and variety in curriculum at the state and local levels. The role of the federal government is to protect and preserve, you can't see Chris looking at me like an abused puppy, and preserve state and local control over the curriculum, program of instruction, administration, and personnel of educational institutions, schools, and school systems. Indeed, that is why my administration rejects the Common Core curriculum and all efforts to have the federal government impose a national curriculum or national standards in education. Vigorous participation in local government has always been America's laboratory of liberty and a key to what makes us exceptional. The best way to preserve the story of America's founding principles is to live it in action by local communities reasserting control of how children receive patriotic education in their schools.
Wait, the reason I had that look on my face is because he's saying, oh, Americans should have choice in how they are educated, but don't educate them like this.
Yeah, they should have choice, but only the choices that Donald J. Trump wants them to have. Or that administration.
Why does this veer off into, like, also fuck Common Core at the end? Like,
I don't know. I know a lot of people on, of various political persuasions who don't like Common Core, but they just don't like the idea that well, traditionally in America, the federal government does not regulate education. That's part of states' rights. But of course, the federal government provides funding for state education. So, like, it does influence it. Anyway, that's the best I could find for a summary for this thing. Our characters and setting. The United States of America. Us, now.
Me, you, and everyone else.
Also, everyone who has ever lived in the area that is now the United States since around the year of 1600.
We're going to talk about all those, but this report doesn't really mention everyone that was involved.
Sure doesn't. All right, so this is look, I'm just going to start this off with a disclaimer that hi, hello, we are not historians. We're not U.S. historians. We have done the best we can. We have taken...
Neither were they, though. No, they weren't either.
Yeah.
So I feel like this is equal footing, to be honest.
I mean, we weren't commissioned by the government. We were commissioned by Teriblo. I don't know. Teriblo's pretty powerful. He's probably powerful, more powerful. What's I'm trying to say there?
There he is. He's kind of trying to talk through you.
Teriblo.
Speaking in tongues.
Teriblo probably more powerful than most federal governments. Anyhow,
you heard it here first.
We're not historians. We're not U.S. historians. That being said, we read this report. We have also both been raised in America as American citizens. Although full disclaimer, Chris has divided loyalties.
That's true. I'm a dual citizen.
Yeah.
I'm also a citizen of Poland.
Yes.
So, I have some mild kielbasa loyalty that, it might pop up here and there. Just, if you really need to know exactly, every possible full disclosure.
Full disclosure.
I'm Slav.
Anyhow, my point.
I got the sauerkraut ready to go at any moment.
Oh yeah, my point is just that this isn't going to be a perfect critique from the point of historians. We did the best we could to read this, engage with the 1619 Project and read criticisms of both things. So it's kind of a lot. We're not going to be able to cover everything. We're just going to cover things that were really notable for us in these readings. So things that were good. This doesn't really happen a lot, but I literally cannot think of anything.
Were there any misspellings?
You know what? You're right. I don't think there were any typographical errors like spelling or syntax. That's true.
It was readable. The graphic layout was...
No. I'm gonna veto that. I actually have an initial complaint about the layout and how it was kind of not very readable. But you're right. There were no noticeable misspellings or syntax errors. The sentences, they functioned as English sentences. I mean, some of them, I definitely have issue with the content.
Sure, the content is a whole other thing. I mean, this whole thing kind of reads like someone trying to do, wave a shiny patriotic object in front of you by saying like, well, it starts with... The first line of this thing is there are truths that are self-evident. Like they're just bringing up that first line of the Declaration of Independence as if I think it really is just some sort of weird Jedi mind trick to go like, well, it's using the same words as the Declaration of Independence, which is a good thing. Therefore, this is a good thing.
Right. Their entire idea here is that if they get people to agree to how great the Declaration and the Constitution are, that will unify Americans. So that's why they constantly use pull quotes from those documents and use phrases that mirror them. Because that's the whole idea, the whole construct of this. Anyhow, yeah, I mean, other than it being technically edited, I just don't have anything great to say.
I think there's one accuracy in it. In that there is a fundamental philosophical different beginning point for people that, let's say, agree with this report and people that might disagree with it. There's one thing running through here, through a lot of the report, that's basically there are certain laws of nature that no government can change. Like, there are fundamental truths about things, about how society should be run and what makes a good society, that are inalienable and cannot be changed, and the idea of trying to alter or change them over time is bad. And there's some merit to that in some senses, but it basically also casts aside the idea that if you're trying to change the system you live in, that this is bad, but also it's good, but also it's bad. So I don't know what it's trying to say sometimes, because it'll be like, you should take an objective look at the faults and failures of the society you live in, but don't say shit bad about America. We got over all those problems, so don't say nothing else.
I am going to disagree with you about there being some kind of eternal truths. I mean, I think that that's going to be different for each group of people, right? So I don't know that I would...
I'm mostly on that side too. What I'm saying is, like, maybe perhaps the one fundamental truth is that thing in the Constitution where, hey, everyone should be allowed life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Yes, of course, we all agree with that idea. But that's like its whole point is, like, you should just focus on that and don't worry about anything else.
Yeah, the document definitely spends time on saying, but they wrote that thing, therefore it's true. And it's like, well,
they can't be hypocrites for being slave owners.
Yeah, it's very throughout the entire document, it's very much based, they want you to base your opinion of America and history and America itself on what is written in its texts, and not necessarily how those things were carried out or not carried out. And it's very strange, because of course you should always judge things on actions, right? Not on not on words, because people can say whatever the fuck they want and then do the total opposite. So it is kind of odd that they just, like Chris was saying, they just don't want to engage with anything that is sort of negative. But I'm just going to try to go back to my notes here and talk about the structure and why I actually thought it was difficult to read. So there were some parts where it would say, okay, here's this quote from X person. But then there would be a giant quote in the way from someone else before the actual quote they were talking about. So you had to like leap over this enormous quote to get to the actual quote they mentioned. And I was like, why would you format this way? It's needlessly confusing.
Get on my quote jumping shoes over here.
Yeah. Well, and the whole thing is set up. All the images and quotes are all of figures from U.S. history that have always been traditionally talked about. It's like Abraham Lincoln, Martin Luther King Jr., George Washington, Thomas Jefferson. It's just, and it's kind of, they trot out kind of the same old tired stuff that people have always been, at least much of American youth has been taught, I would say. And yeah, so it just comes off as kind of like lame and cheesy, I mean, in this day and age, it's kind of silly. And speaking of these quotes and kind of like these sort of traditional ideas, they really love to use quotes out of context to really twist the meaning. And I have two examples that I would like to talk about. So there's a moment where they use the famous Ringbolt quote from Frederick Douglass's "What for the Slave is the 4th of July" speech, which is an incredible speech. You should read it if you never have, or listen to a reading of it. And the way that they use this quote is just a bald-faced deception. I mean, I'm just going to go ahead and read the quote in context so you can appreciate how twisted its usage is in the report. So this was on July 5th, 1852, and Frederick Douglass delivered this address to the ladies of the Rochester Anti-Slavery Sewing Society. And it kind of it starts in sort of a weird way.
Sewing society?
Yeah, I was surprised by that too. I'm
trying to make a shirt and this dude's in here laying down truths. I gotta go to more stitching bitches.
Yeah. Hey man, that's how shit happens. People get together in clubs. All right. The idea of a total separation of the colonies was born on the 2nd of July, 1776. The Old Continental Congress, to the dismay of the lovers of ease and the worshippers of property, clothed that dreadful idea with all the authority of national sanction. They did so in the form of a resolution. And as we seldom hit upon resolutions, drawn up in our day whose transparency is at all equal to this, it may refresh your minds and help my story if I read it. And this is a quote. Resolved that these united colonies are, and of right, ought to be free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be dissolved. Citizens, your fathers made good that resolution. They succeeded, and today you reap the fruits of their success. The freedom gained is yours, and you, therefore, may properly celebrate this anniversary. The 4th of July is the first great fact in your nation's history, the very ring bolt in the chain of your yet undeveloped destiny. Pride and patriotism, not less than gratitude, prompt you to celebrate and to hold it in perpetual remembrance. I have said that the Declaration of Independence is the ring bolt to the chain of your nation's destiny. So indeed I regard it. The principles contained in that instrument are saving principles. Stand by those principles, be true to them on all occasions, in all places, against all foes, and at whatever cost. I am not included within the pale of this glorious anniversary. Your high independence only reveals the immeasurable distance between us. The blessings in which you this day rejoice are not enjoyed in common. The rich inheritance of justice, liberty, prosperity, and independence bequeathed by your fathers is shared by you, not by me. The sunlight that brought forth life and healing to you has brought stripes and death to me. This 4th of July is yours, not mine. You may rejoice, I must mourn. To drag a man in fetters into the grand illuminated temple of liberty and call upon him to join you in joyous anthems were inhuman mockery and sacrilegious irony. Do you mean, citizens, to mock me by asking me to speak today? What to the American slave is your 4th of July? I answer, a day that reveals to him, more than all other days in the year, the gross injustice and cruelty to which he is the constant victim. To him, your celebration is a sham, your boasted liberty an unholy license, your national greatness swelling vanity. Your sounds of rejoicing are empty and heartless, your denunciations of tyrants, brass-fronted impudence, your shouts of liberty and equality, hollow mockery. Your prayers and hymns, your sermons and thanksgivings, with all your religious parade and solemnity, are to him mere bombast, fraud, deception, impiety, and hypocrisy, a thin veil to cover up crimes which would disgrace a nation of savages. There is not a nation on the earth guilty of practices more shocking and bloody than are the people of these United States at this very hour.
Fred, that's all cool and everything, but this is a sewing club, Fred?
It's an anti-slavery sewing club. But anyway,
I just imagining like the lady is be like, we were making sure. Okay, all right. Well, yeah, you're right, but
anyway, so I know that was long, but I just really wanted to hammer the point home that in the report, let me just.
What's the quote they use, Paris?
They just use the quote that they have is, "The Declaration of Independence is the ring bolt to the chain of your nation's destiny. So indeed I regard it. The principles contained in that instrument are saving principles. Stand by those principles, be true to them on all occasions, in all places, against all foes, and at whatever cost. Frederick Douglass." So, like...
Lost a little bit of context. Just a little bit. I don't know if that was what he was really saying that whole time.
Yeah, no shit.
I feel like they just saw that. They Googled, like, good Frederick Douglass quotes. And they didn't even know that it was part of that.
Yeah, so my point in wasting... I mean, it wasn't a waste of time. My point in spending all that time on...
Top 10 Fred Doug quotes.
My point in spending all that time and reading that original section was to really make it obvious how twisted that use of the quote is. And by the way, that's one of those like giant big ass quotes that you gotta like leap over to actually read the text. And then the second one is they take this quote from Martin Luther King Jr.'s famous "I Have a Dream" speech. So they, once again, one of those big ass quotes you gotta like fucking jump over, use a vaulting
My
pole.
+2 quote vaulting shoes will help in this.
So this is the Martin Luther King Jr. quote from the "I Have a Dream" speech. They used this. "When the architects of our republic wrote the magnificent words of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, they were signing a promissory note to which every American was to fall heir. This note was a promise that all men, yes, black men as well as white men, would be guaranteed the unalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." So the fun thing about that quote is that if you just read the next line, it's this. "It is obvious today that America has defaulted on this promissory note insofar as her citizens of color are concerned." So like...
I mean, really just like best Martin Luther King quote.
So again, like when you take these quotes out of context and try to say, see, Martin Luther King Jr. thought that racism was over because the Declaration totally included black people without including the sentence immediately after where he says, y'all still not including us. It's 1963. like, I mean, it's just, you're not using that primary source accurately. And this happens, more than just those two times. And
they don't even tell you, like, I mean, they say it's from the I Have a Dream speech, but there's no citation or anything of the sort in this anywhere. If you want to go check up on something, fucking, you're on your own for the most part.
Yeah. I mean, one of my favorite parts of this is the lack of citations. So there are 0 citations or a bibliography in this report, which is incredible.
You've already failed the History 101 course that you could have maybe turned this into.
Like, it's one thing if you're just like some ranting blog asshole. I mean, I would still want citations, but when you're like, hey, we're the federal government and this is going to be like a definitive official accounting of U.S. history, and you're like, I'm not gonna.
In your imitation, the federal government is like a valley girl, kind of like, hey, like we're just gonna write down everything about America in this one report, and then everyone can just click over here, and you'll know right away what's going on. It's fine.
Yeah, and it's like especially odd because sometimes they just say like, a famous whatever once said, and you're like, who is that famous person? Who the fuck are you talking about? Now I gotta fucking open another tab and Google this goddamn quote because you couldn't be bothered to just write someone's name and put a footnote there. So it's pretty strange for a historical account to not include any references or citations, especially to primary sources. I mean, an integral tenet of history and in the study of history is gathering, reading, and citing primary sources in your works. Holy shit.
This report in the appendix section about education demands you do.
Does it?
Yes, it's in the education section. It's like all classrooms must use primary sources primarily or only.
Oh,
it says that in the education part.
Sorry, I must have just blacked out because there were parts of this that I was like, I can't handle this right now. I gotta walk away.
Yes, there's a bunch of paragraphs in like I think it was like Appendix C or something about how we should be educating our children about American history. It says use primary sources only, which this one basically doesn't do. It just pulls a couple of good sounding quotes from them and doesn't give you any context. And on top of that, just like one little extra point here, I think the reason that they're saying use primary sources only is basically them trying to sidestep any critique of primary sources by academic sources.
Correct.
They're basically saying don't read anything of an academic nature about these primary sources. And I do agree, yes, go to the primary sources and read them as you are also reading the critical
of course.
material as well.
I'm just saying that generally the practice of history is like, amassing a bunch of primary sources, reading them and critiquing them, and then also reading the critiques from other people. And I would like to just plug a professor of mine from college, Josh Reed. He's a well-regarded Snohomish U.S. historian. He published a book a few years ago that you should pick up if you're curious about either like maritime stuff or indigenous history in the Pacific Northwest. It's called The Sea is My Country, The Maritime World of the Macaws. So anyway, thanks Professor Josh Reed for being an awesome U.S. history professor when I was in college and teaching me the importance of primary sources. Just wanted to plug that. So it is very strange. And it's especially strange because this particular work, this report, it makes some pretty wild claims at times that, if for example, a liberal outlet made, I'm sure that they would be rallying for some kind of citation. I mean, there's literally a line about a shadow government, and you're like, okay, so you're just gonna drop like there's a shadow government and not provide. There's just no support provided for a lot of these really.
Also, if you're the government, can't you you have the power to root them out now, right? Because that's you guys. If you know where they are.
Yeah, if you know about this.
If you know about this, you can do a thing about this now, right?
Yeah, and they also make sweeping claims like X is like a certain thing is destroying America, ruining children's lives. I think they say something like colleges and universities are teaching people to hate America.
Like many times.
Just they're making these really bold statements without backing any of it up. And, even though I vehemently disagree with this report, it would be easier to stomach if they had at least put any effort into convincing me. I mean, this is really just a propaganda piece.
Yes.
There's nothing...
I have seen racist posts on Reddit that were better sourced and researched than this thing. At least throw a shitty false graph, like a misinterpreted graph at me or something,
Yeah, I mean, at least try, right? And related to this lack of citations and the fact that this is kind of a propaganda piece, there are a lot of phrases in here or sentences that just don't actually say anything, but sound like something and also sound easy to agree with. And this kind of writing is a propaganda tactic that, like Chomsky has talked about a lot in his discussion of propaganda. And, it's basically, if you don't know the kind of writing I'm talking about something so pointless and vague or kind of like hard to disagree with that it doesn't say anything.
Much like when I said at the top of the report, they go, we hold truth to be self-evident that everyone should be free and equal. Like, yeah, okay. Sure, but what are you really trying to say with that? Like, you're trying to say that I disagree with that because I dared to critique the systems that we see in American politics or life?
Yeah. Sorry, I'm trying to find my favorite one. Oh, here we go. So, sorry, I'll read the sentence before it just so there's some context. They did not merely wish to assert that they disliked British rule. This is, of course, talking about the revolution, the colonial revolution. And so we're replacing it with something they liked better. They wished to state a justification for their actions and for the government to which it would give birth that is both true and moral. Moral, because it is faithful to the truth about things.
Oh.
Excuse me?
You see, it's moral.
Sorry,
because it's really the truth about things.
Things. The truth about things.
Things.
I mean, and nothing before or after that clarifies, by the way.
Yeah, I want to take it aside here. This is like some conversations I've had with my dad before. Recently, I had a mini argument with him about what a tradition is, you see. I forgot how we got into this argument or something, but he was trying to, like, make some kind of argument that about religious like Christianity things aren't traditions because that's a thing that God told you to do, and if God told you to do it, it's not a tradition even if you pass it down through the years and generations.
I mean, you could call it a divine tradition if you really wanted to get all gaudy about it.
Sure, yeah, but like he was arguing, we were literally arguing about what a tradition is. Which I was saying, like, okay, so it's something that gets passed down as a practice through culture, generations. And he was like, no, not if God told you to do it.
Then what is that called in his world?
The truth.
Okay.
But it's that same kind of thing, right? Where like there's this immutable axiom that is outside of all things and you must accept it.
I mean, if in his life that's what he wants to do, that's fine. But like,
yeah, no, I'm not arguing about that. But I'm just saying that like the hair splitting about like morality is really moral because it's the truth about things. Like, well, what is that truth? How do you know it's the truth? Well, because.
Yeah, and like, why does it have to be the same truth for everyone? I don't know. Anyway. My point was that was one of my favorite like purple prose trying to make you think this was really there's just God. Anyway, before we get into like my notes on every little thing, Related. So this is also related to the lack of citations and kind of these phrases that say nothing. Only 2 of the 24 plus people involved in crafting this thing have even sort of tangentially related to U.S. history backgrounds. There are actually 0 U.S. historians involved in a U.S. history report from the federal government. So
not even like a conservative leaning one. It's weird. Not like those don't exist.
Yeah. I mean, I don't. Yeah, it's like
at least get the PragerU guys out here or something. Like even this.
I mean, most of these, or not most, but several of these people were from like the Heritage Foundation, which is a conservative, right leaning. It's hard to say history here for me because I do feel like they're so slanted. Organization. I forget exactly if they're a think tank or if they do things instead of just thinking. I don't really know. Yeah. But and a lot of these people's names were so generic. I had a hard time figuring out who they were. Some of them are lawyers. Some people were like the head of departments of colleges and things like that. But again, none of them are U.S. historians, which is kind of bizarre, right? I mean, it's one thing if this were presenting itself, if this was like, hey, we're a bunch of conservatives and this is our private report. Like, fine, sure. But again, like when you are the federal government of a nation, you should probably take more care in hiring actual historians. And I'm not saying that just because someone isn't a U.S. historian means they could never comment on U.S. history. But again, if you're trying to write something that is supposed to be this like foundational document for educating the nation's youth, I think you should have some U.S. historians involved. Yeah. I just feel like they should be in the mix.
Bar. One. There was like 24 people here.
Or more than that, including all the helpers. It was like, I don't know, 30 something.
You know what? I'm so sure that the helpers wrote it and then everyone else slapped their name on it because this so reads like something that got passed in at the last minute.
Well, it's probably because a quarter of it was self-plagiarized by some of the authors.
Oh.
So essentially, it seems like a lot of what this commission did was kind of just say, okay, we're all super hard right conservatives. Let's, we only have 2 months to do this, I guess. So, I mean, in that sense, I sort of sympathize a little bit. I'm like, all right, you were given a tall order, like write this super right-wing conservative propaganda history document in 2 months. Good luck. I mean, but then again, there was, 24 plus people involved. So I still feel like they could have done a better job, especially if they're supposed to be educated experts in things.
The moral truth of things.
Things. Anyhow, about a quarter
That's
of it.
That's me, Chris Moose, thingologist.
So about a quarter of it is self-plagiarized, and all that means is that an author uses pieces or large swaths of pre-existing works and doesn't tell you that they've done that. So, it doesn't. At first, you're like, oh, that doesn't sound too bad, but then you're like, well, that kind of sucks though, because if they're not telling you that it's from something before, then it looks like something new that they created. And it's just kind of lazy, right? And this was discovered because a U.S. women's history assistant professor named Courtney Thompson decided to just run the document through one of those plagiarism software things. She ran it through Turnitin. And that's how she discovered that about 26% of it was self-plagiarized. Yeah. Anyway, I don't really know, like, why would it be so hard just to cite yourselves? It's not hard to do footnotes or bibliography or any kind of citation.
I have to pull down figure out in the MS Word document thing what pull down menu it's under, and that's under like a sub menu and like a settings thing. Are you crazy?
I mean,
do you work?
Oh,
is that what you want me to do? Work?
Yes,
Paris?
do work. I mean, obviously, this was also
I thought all you socialists didn't want to do any work. What the fuck?
This was also not peer reviewed, of course, before publishing.
Is it academic enough to be put under peer review?
I feel
I don't peer review my emails to a friend before I send them out. Well, sometimes I think, but
do you publish your emails on a federal government platform for all to read and teach in schools?
Well, yeah, okay, good point there, I suppose.
Yeah.
But
so
fucking Donald Trump did fucking peer review those tweets, did he?
So my last kind of point about the technical and formatting and kind of the general setup of this thing. Honestly, trying to address any nation's history in 20 pages is a fucking fool's errand. I do not understand.
What about that one guy that was like, this is the Republic of Gary or whatever, and he tried to like set up a sovereign nation of himself?
I'm unfamiliar with the
There was a
Republic
guy
of
that
Gary.
tried to do that. He was like, my house is the Republic of Gary or something. Like, it was like Dave or Gary, some shit like that. Am I thinking about a book or a movie instead? I think I might be thinking about that.
I think you're thinking about the Family Guy episode where Peter formed like Petertopia or something. I honestly
that
don't
was
even...
based on a thing though. That was like a real some guy tried that shit. Some guy somewhere tried that shit.
Do we want to Google the Gary Nation?
No,
Gary Nation?
no. I'm gonna cite this. Why do I have to do that if they're not citing their shit?
I also don't even know. God, I haven't thought about Family Guy in like 15 years. God. Anyway. Talk about something that hasn't aged well. Woof.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah, let's continue onward anyway.
Yeah. Let's see. And like lastly, this is a very long lastly in this section. Like no large portion of the nation was like, we need this because this, this kind of traditional, macho, white-centered telling of American history is what is already taught in schools. Like, no one was like, we need more of it again. I mean, that's just so...
Well, it's because the universities were trying to say, like, hey, but actually, and so that we can't have that.
And no, it's pretty, like Chris said at kind of the top of the show, it's pretty obvious that this was just a petty project fueled by Trump and a lot of conservatives being mad about the 1619 project. But like, for me, if you're mad about the 1619 project, then pick on the things about it that were actually problematic or wrong, rather than going off on this like totally weird tangent. I mean, it would just make way more sense and also make you seem a little more credible, right? If you were like, hey, these are our precise criticisms of the 1619 project and things that got wrong. I mean, and some people did that. The 1619 project, did have some issues, like any enormous undertaking, journalistic undertaking, right? You get a lot of people working on something for a long period of time, not 2 months. And I mean, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the 1619 project just because it's important, because the 1776 Commission report wouldn't have existed if the 1619 project didn't come out when it did.
Yeah.
So
this is a spite report.
It is a spite report, 1000%. So, the 1619 project did have some issues. The biggest one is that when they first started it, some of the materials really overstated that the primary reason for the American Revolution was to maintain slavery. So, like, maintaining slavery was definitely part of the revolution, but placing it as the primary reason isn't supported by primary sources or what we know about history. And after getting a lot of criticism, they did rephrase the tagline and they have softened that stance. That was kind of the biggest one. And then there were also some other stuff like there was a historian that was a consultant on the project. And the historian was like, hey, because I guess the 1619 people contacted the historian and was like, hey, this is what we think of like how slaves lived in the 1600s or whatever, or in the colonies. And the historian was like, well, the life of enslaved people varied like radically based on where they were and what decade, never mind century we're talking about. But the 1619 people like didn't take that criticism and just kind of made a blanket dressing for the lives of enslaved folks. So, and I don't actually know if that was rectified, or hasn't been rectified yet. But, it's not like, I do think it's shitty that they didn't listen to the historian. I don't know why that choice was made. But I also don't think that, kind of a reductive portrayal of enslaved people's, lived conditions. It was kind of like a small, from what I remember, it was sort of a smaller part of it. Like, that doesn't really change the essential truths, right? Anyway, I still think that they should have listened to this story, and I still don't really understand why they didn't. There were also some other stuff, like they inaccurately said that American slavery was threatened by British abolitionism, even though there wasn't a large abolition movement in Britain by 1776. And they also referenced a 1772 lawsuit regarding slavery in Britain. And the critique of that was like, well, it was a decision for just Britain. It didn't have anything to do with the colonies. It's like, yeah, but even if it didn't directly affect them, the colonies were primarily British. They would have known about the case, and it would have affected their minds.
Yes.
I kind of didn't really agree with that criticism. I was like, maybe the way that it was put in the 1619 project didn't illustrate it well. That that it was more of an influence and less of a direct, legal ruling. Anyhow, these things are problems. And I'm sure there are other little things that were addressed, but like, let's keep in mind here, this is a private project by journalists, private citizens. They weren't publishing on behalf of the fucking federal government.
Pretty big difference.
Yeah. And their intent was to bring a new angle to the study of U.S. history, and they made many other points that were valid and true. It's and they have references and citations. It's also an ongoing effort, and it's multifaceted. Like Chris was saying, it's a multimedia thing. They've got a podcast, a magazine, web materials, and there's also a forthcoming book. So it's a lot more than like 45 pages of hurriedly cut and pasted propaganda. I really, even if you're like, oh, that sounds like super liberal horseshit, I really urge you to read or listen to it and then like read some parts of the 1776 report. I'm not telling you to like spend a whole day on this, but really seeing these two things together, I feel really highlights the things that are so bad about the 1776 Commission report and the good things in the 1619 project. I will say I did listen to the 1619 project when it came out, and honestly, my memory is real bad. I don't super remember it very well, and I did not have time to re-listen to it before this recording. However, I did read some of the articles. I also thought they were great. And again, references, citations. They explain to you why they see history from the lens that they do. Whereas the 1776 Commission report does not do that. It simply states something. It doesn't show you anything. And again, telling rather than showing is a cardinal sin of writing. So that's my piece on that. I think I'm also going to mention that like the critique, whether you care about this or not, the backlash of the 1776 Commission report was far greater and more scathing and came from, I think, I don't know. I want to say like there was a whole list of organizations that signed a letter condemning the report, and it was a pretty blistering rebuke. The American Anthropological Association, the American Association for State and Local History, the American Catholic Historical Association, the American Folklore Society, American Libraries, American Sociological Association, American Studies Association, Georgia Association of Historians, Phi Beta Kappa Society.
The frat, the frat just came in here.
Yeah, they were like, the Polish American Historical Association.
Mm-hmm. Everyone got in on this one.
Society for U.S. Intellectual History, Society of American Archivists. The
Burger
point is,
King somehow.
the furry alliance of North America. Weird. No, I'm kidding. But my point in reading off, like a smattering of these organizations that co-signed this letter is that, you didn't really have that happen with the 1619 Project. There was a letter signed by a handful of sort of more middling conservative historians. But even there, and there were also, strangely, critiques from other people at the New York Times who were like, I didn't like the 1619 Project. And then the people working on the project had to write against their own staff in their own paper. It was very weird. You can read all of it. It's still online if you're interested. Yeah, anyway, this letter, the American Historical Association was the one who kind of wrote the letter, and then all his other orgs signed onto it. My favorite quote is this. The report actually consists of two main themes, one of which is a screed against a half-century of historical scholarship, presented largely as a series of caricatures using single examples, most notably the 1619 Project, to represent broader historiographical trends. And this is an important point, right? Because even though the 1619 Project is the thing these authors and Trump was mad about, which is why they made the report, they don't actually address the report directly, and they make it seem as though that one project is somehow this it's this new idea. All these are new ideas. Oh, no one else has ever done this before, ever thought this way, thought differently than the traditional telling of American history, when in reality, this stuff's been going on for decades. I guess the one difference here, though, is the New York Times put this out. So you have, this kind of visibility and accessibility that perhaps other scholars did not have when discussing these alternate views of human history. So I think just because, it's the New York Times, suddenly everyone feels like no one's ever thought of this before. And it's no, people, this has been taught for quite some time. In the evil colleges of the United States.
Oh no.
And I just, sorry, one last thing before we move on to the next section.
There's a whole other half of this fucking show we still have to get to.
Yeah, sorry, everyone. This is a long one. I've said this a few times in different ways, but there really seems to be a need for this sort of this different approach to history, where we're focusing Black Americans and Indigenous Americans and the experience of non-white folks. And this is obvious because there have been studies from the Southern Poverty Law Center and others in recent years where when they survey kids and test them on American history, few of them have much knowledge about the experiences of enslaved Americans or Black Indigenous side of history, because many of them are being taught the brand of history that's in this report, right? This America is exceptional, and we did away with slavery, and racism's over, and everything's great now. And it's pretty unfortunate that we kind of have stuck with this American exceptionalism and hero worship of founders and famous figures at the expense of critical thinking and challenging ourselves to be better, right? If we really want people to have, roughly equivalent chances at life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, I don't know that we're ever going to be done doing that. Whereas I feel like a lot of these people that, wrote this report feel like, oh yeah, we're there. We did it. Woo!
Yeah, that's a fundamental. And they even decry this sort of progressives think that all ideology is malleable and just up to what all people decide is true, which isn't it
isn't that how this works? You say that you want people to that you want the governed to make the decisions about how they are governed. It's the whole thing, right?
Doesn't that mean that maybe some attitudes will change over time and things will become different? Perhaps? Maybe?
Maybe.
Also, the part where you're holding up the founding fathers is revolutionaries that had radical new thoughts, and then like later on you're like, all these other revolutions were bloody and had violence and they were bad. Like,
any other radical thoughts are evil.
Basically when it has a couple of sections on like fascism and socialism and communism,
Christ, yeah.
and it says all these bloody revolutions that led to much death, and I was like, did you think everyone just like had chess games in the American Revolution?
Yeah,
just like friendly. Oh, by Jove, you've sunk my battle king ship. I guess we must leave the colonies now.
Yeah, total distortion of history.
Violent
there.
and bloody and.
So speaking of that distortion of history, this is the actual facts / presentation of history section, and there is this quote that I read, and this is 1,000,000,000% how I feel. There's this professor of history from UC Davis named Eric Rauchway, and he told the Washington Post in an article, "It's very hard to find anything in here, the 1776 Commission report, that stands as a historical claim or as the work of a historian. Almost everything in it is wrong, just as a matter of fact. I may sound a little incoherent when trying to speak of this because the report itself is not coherent. It's like historical whack-a-mole." And man, that is exactly how I feel. I mean, yeah, continuing on that theme, like there are just so many distortions and outright falsehoods that it's really hard to cover them all. We'll just hit on some stuff.
Or even some just blatant omissions. Let's start with perhaps the biggest omission of all, Paris.
Oh boy.
Which is that just native peoples as a whole apparently just not a part of this story at all for these folks. There is the one line that I literally had an outward expression of disbelief, like gasping out loud and going like, "Are you fucking kidding me?" There is a line in here about how
it's on page 2. I have it.
Oh, good. Well, could you perhaps read this line?
Yeah. "And although a relatively young country, its people have shared a history of common struggle and achievement, from carving communities out of a vast, untamed wilderness to winning independence and forming a new government through wars, industrialization, waves of immigration, technological progress, and political change."
All right, so first of all, as if America is the first country to ever carve itself out of the wilderness. Also, secondly, it wasn't complete untamed. There was many native indigenous cultures hanging out all over the place. There were all kinds.
Whole ass societies.
They had agriculture and livestock,
and
which
trade.
is a tamed wilderness.
Language.
Those buffalo, perhaps,
religion.
that we have many examples of like buffalo being hunted by native cultures, even in just fucking hokey westerns and shit, right? Like it's such an erasure of native peoples that the fucking tortured soul of Andrew Jackson in hell for a moment like had a brief smile on his face when this line was written.
I mean, you're not wrong. I also
just
had
my legacy is still.
I also had to take a moment after I read that phrase. I highlighted the phrase, carving communities out of a vast, untamed wilderness, and my note was, Clippy thinks you should replace this phrase with stealing land from pre-existing nations. That's really what happened. I mean,
untamed wilderness is really the set of words that made me angry. Because it's just saying they weren't there.
Dude, let's go through. Yeah, I know. It's just this complete and get this. They don't talk about. I think they might say indigenous or native like one other time. 2, actually, I can just do a quick searchy-roo here. The appearance of the word native happens 7 times. And guess what? It's not about Native Americans. It's the word alternative.
Wow. You need a better find function on that.
I'm sorry. Native only happens twice. Sorry, it took a second to reload. For the word native, not applying to Native Americans, and alternative. Let's try indigenous. Clippy, search for indigenous.
I'm sorry, I'm Clippy searching for indigenous.
0 for indigenous. All right, I was being more generous than I should have been.
Paris, I know this isn't in here, but like let's give them a little bit of the benefit of the like racist doubt here and type in Indian.
Oh, you're probably right. Fuck. Yes. Hang on, Chris. Do you want to know where the word Indian appears?
Yes, of course.
In the text of the Declaration of Independence, that's in the first appendix.
So the document that they really jerked themselves off about at least mentions the cultures.
It is notable because it does say the merciless Indian savages. Sorry, folks, that is in our Constitution.
Yeah, but at least they're mentioned. Wow. The bar is so low.
Yeah. It's not a good sentence. Like, the phrase is bad, but the sentence is actually worse. Yeah.
Oh, so yeah, just again, complete ignoring and erasure of the many cultures. Many cultures.
I mean, and like the crazy shit they say right at the beginning, I have a note. There's a sentence that says, "But no nation before America ever dared state those truths as the formal basis for its politics, and none has strived harder or done more to achieve them." And my note is, really? No other fucking country ever in the history of humanity has stated that it wanted to base its system of government on equality, liberty, and justice? No other country has strived harder? Like, that's kind of an insane statement to make, right? And I'm guessing that perhaps, even if you read that like really strictly as state meaning written, I don't know. I don't feel
they
like
might be trying to say like America was the first one to say that.
Oh yeah, well they do say that, and that's also not totally right. They make this statement. It says that like republics have been short-lived, and Chris and I were like, wasn't the Roman Republic around for like 500 years? Like, that's
maybe a little more than that.
I wouldn't consider that short-lived. And also, maybe that's wrong, because they still had, anyway. There's also like San Marino has the longest lasting republic in modern history at like over 400 years, and Iceland has kind of been doing the same thing for, I don't know, quite some time, longer than 200 years. I don't know. I mean, and the reason they say this is because, so there's like a really strict reading where, they talk about how America is the first one to have a written constitution, and like sort of, again, San Marino is up there, is longer than us, but like technically America has the oldest single document written constitution. So it's like a really specific, it's a really narrow specific definition. And I also don't know why that is so important. Like, I mean, because like you got the Magna Carta, right? I mean, that was it's been around for a bit. It was written. Of course, it wasn't like a, anyway, point being, yes, the founding of the United States does have some pretty like revolutionary documents that not a lot of places had at that time or anywhere, whatever, or since. But again, it's this couching it as exceptional then and therefore forever exceptional and wonderful. It's like people can have different governments and they could be just as good. I don't know.
No, there's only one way to do things, Paris. It's the truth about things.
Oh, here's my favorite one. In two decisive respects, the United States of America is unique. First, it has a definite birthday. Motherfucker, most nations have a national day. Like, what are you talking about?
I like that this was a point they made. It's like, well, America's special because we have a specific birthday that we know about. And they give examples of like other republics being founded and like organized through a series of like events over years, which is still what happened with America.
Yes, correct.
There was still like a whole war that took a while and like a constitutional convention that it all didn't happen like July 4th, 1776. We had the whole war and everyone had the agreement on the Constitution. It was a crazy day, Paris. It was a crazy day.
All of history happened. Yeah. I mean, and it's just absurd. I mean, like, so many countries have a national day. Norway's got May 17th, you know, it's the 10th of May. What's Poland's national day? I'm sure they got one.
I don't know. Don't put me on the spot like
Sorry. But
I'm sorry, I don't deserve my dual citizenship.
Point being, it's very common for a nation to celebrate its heritage. And I know that they're saying, like, well, we know this is like the day they signed the thing. But like Chris said, I mean, like any nation, it was a culmination of events before it. I just think it's a really stupid thing to say.
It's very reductive and silly.
And it says, second, it declares from the moment of its founding not merely the principles on which its new government will be based, it asserts those principles to be true and universal. Like, I'm sure a lot of nations were like, this is the truth of everything. Like, it just seems like an oversimplification. Also, these aren't U.S. historians. These aren't historians writing this. I don't know.
All right, Pass, I think we got to keep moving here.
Man.
There's a lot more chaff to cut here.
Oh, wait. No, this is good. Sorry, let me do it. Okay. We confront, finally, the difficulty that the eternal principles elucidated in the Declaration were stated and became the basis for an actual government only a relatively short time ago. Yet, if these principles are both eternal and accessible to the human mind, why were they not discovered and acted upon long before 1776? Motherfucker, are you trying to tell me that people could think of equality and liberty, but those ideas were never actually acted upon until 1776 in America? Like,
yeah, no one ever tried to do any of that shit before. How about, this is actually a great segue into the next claim that I took much issue with, which was America being presented as if it was the first country to outlaw slavery.
Yeah,
there's a line in here where it's like America was the first to like abolish slavery in the world, and everyone followed our lead. And Wikipedia is not a great source, but it's like, again, I literally typed into, I didn't even do any scholarly research. I just went to Google and I went, who abolished slavery when? And up comes the Wikipedia page. And how about this? We've got Goryeo, which was like sort of a loose federation or kingdom in what is now Korea in 952. We didn't even have a 1 before anything yet. And a dude by the name of Gwangjong banned the enslavement of anyone in his territories in 952. We've got 1102, the Council of London, banning the selling of man like animals. That's a quote in Norman, England. In 1256, the country of Bologna, yes, Bologna.
I think it's Bologna.
But I'm just saying Bologna because it's funny.
Okay.
Abolished serfdom and slavery as a whole within its borders.
They also abolished any sandwiches made with whole meats.
Yes.
Got to be mixed of at least 3 animals to count.
It caused the Great Deli Meat War of the 13th century. So, I mean, that's a whole other topic. We'll get to that. In 1347, Casimir the Great of Poland tried to free... he wrote an edict, or it's thought that he tried to write an edict. There's actually a little bit of, argument about whether he actually wrote this or whether it was posthumously attributed to him. But anyway, in 1347, Casimir or someone working under him wrote an edict trying to free all non-free people in Poland. And this one was when he was trying to unite... Poland's always been fracturing and coming back together again. It's kind of a key feature of Polish history. He was trying to unite Greater Poland and Lesser Poland, Wielkie Polska and Małe Polskie. It's kind of funny to me because Małe is like a cute term for little, so they were saying like little cute Poland.
Małe Polska, the nation of
Małe.
cats. The nation
Małe.
of cats. Polish cats.
Małe. Not Miawa, but Małe. Anyway, that was a thing. They would try to free all non-free people. We've got 1677, the Maratha Empire in what is now India, banned all enslavement, serfdom, any form of servitude, period. So, yeah, America wasn't the first place to say, like, hey, maybe this is bad.
Yeah, I also think it's interesting that the report constantly harps on, like, well, slavery existed before America. Like, it's not our fault that there's slavery. And also, we ended it. So, like, who are the real heroes? And it's like, y'all.
Not the first in either of those things.
Yeah, like, no one is sitting here blaming America, like, blaming America for starting slavery, but slavery in America took a very specific form, right? And so that's why people talk about American slavery as being, shall we say, exceptional in how brutal and widespread it was. And, chattel slavery in this way. And, there's all these people that are like, what about the Irish? Oh, and like all these stupid whiny complaints about other types of slavery. And just because other types of slavery existed in other places doesn't mean we just don't have to deal with the fact that slavery in America was terrible and had huge impacts on our founding and history. Like, I just don't know why people can't keep two things in mind at one time. It's not hard.
Also, like you said, the sort of the way they present it is if all these critiques of current systems in America are saying that America is uniquely bad because of slavery. Really, all these academic things are trying to point out is that slavery still has a lasting legacy on our society. There are still reverberations of it throughout our culture and systems here, even past the post-civil rights stuff, which, once again, that happened in like the late 50s, early 60s. So there's plenty of people alive right now walking around before that. My father, for one, was around before any of that happened. So when he was very young, Martin Luther King was making speeches. And so like they're not even that old or anything yet. So if you think that the civil rights movement happened and then we washed it all away, it's cool now in less than a century, and there aren't going to be lasting effects of that, you're nuts. I'm sorry. You can't really believe that.
I mean, it's easy for people to swallow this kind of really reductive and whitewashed history because, like many people, they're either, they're privileged in some way. Either they're white or they have adopted a lot of ideas of white supremacy that are just ingrained in American culture and Western culture in general. Because of the existence of, widespread chattel slavery in the United States. And it's just, I don't know how you have something, how you have the ownership and torture of human beings for hundreds of years and go, yeah, we're done now. I mean, if that's like...
It comes down to, I've seen the argument a lot, and it's basically a lot of people going like, well, there's no slaves now. Were you a slave? So therefore, why do you have to talk about slavery as if it happened to you? And it's like, no, I'm not saying that the slavery... I'm saying that there are things that are a result of that happening a while ago that we are still dealing with.
Yeah, I don't really know why it's hard to understand either. It's like, okay, the colonists gained their freedom from England, if we really want to, not that this is like an exact comparison, but, in 1776, and like Frederick Douglass said, it's like, well, black people weren't totally free until, I wouldn't even say the Emancipation Proclamation, because some people didn't even hear about that shit till 2 years after. So, you've got a good almost 100 years difference between when white people in the United States colonies were free and when black people were technically free. And even then, black folks didn't, it's not like, oh, right then everything just was easier. Like, no, they still had to deal with racism and like so many laws were enacted that sort of made slavery just take a new form, like sharecropping. And there were a lot of laws, but people who were white people couldn't even legally marry black folks until, God, what year was that? Not long ago. It was like the 60s, right?
Yes.
Am I wrong?
Miscegenation laws.
Yeah. So it is just crazy to me to think that folks can hear those facts and know that history and go, oh, it's fine. Everything's equal now. And it's just not. Anyway, I didn't mean to get too proselytizy there, but it does make me a little crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, just moving on. There's this idea throughout the document that Chris already talked about where it essentially says You can't think critically about founding members of your nation or its founding documents. And I'm just wondering, like, what do they think life would be like if we literally never made any changes to our founding documents and never created any more laws? I mean, that would just be bizarre, right? Like, life isn't static. Why would we have the same exact laws we had 300 years ago? You know, and it's pretty clear that nations are always, reevaluating their governing documents and their laws because things change over time. I mean, do I really need to explain that time exists and that things change? Like, you age, you're not going to tell me that you're the same person now that you were 10, 20 years ago. I know I'm not, right?
No,
anyway.
But there are universal truths that should never be examined or thought about or critiqued or examined. They're immutable. If there's something that's not immutable, Paris, then everything's just chaos, and I can't handle that personally.
Well, and the weird thing is that they think that these immutable truths are like, life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. No one's critiquing those things. We're critiquing the shit around it. Like
how we're getting there, essentially.
Yeah. I don't really understand this idea that, like, well, you can't critique famous people that did important things. Like, of course you can. It's insane to think that you can't. How are you going to ever understand the true whole of someone who's that? And you should, right? If they're that important to your nation's history and its laws, you should understand them as a whole person. And that includes their hypocrisy and their mistakes. There's a line in here that says, like, well, George Washington freed all of his slaves. And, like, that's not even true. On Washington's deathbed, he was like, I request that you free my slaves. And his wife went, okay. They freed one guy. And then a year later, she was like, okay, I guess I'll free half of them, roughly. So she did. But then the other half remained enslaved for either a couple more decades or so. Some of them were never freed and were actually granted to grandchildren. So, like, again, it's these distortions of history. Like, yeah, George Washington said he wanted to free his slaves, but he also waited until he was fucking dead.
I'm imagining, like, the one guy that got freed was the servant in the room at the time. And, like, Martha just looked at him and, like, at George and him and went, like, okay, I guess I have to with him.
Well, that is a hilarious historical sketch. The one guy that was immediately freed was some like, hero from the war, I think, and they had already agreed, like, yeah, that one's got to be free or something. He was some heroic figure. I'm sorry, I actually don't remember the name that I read. I probably should just go back and find that. But anyway, I don't know, like, and stuff like that. I mean, that's obviously just not a true fact, right? And there are a lot of things like that, and there are just so many of them that
Let's keep it trucking, Paris. Let's see if we can just whack them all these moles. Whack these moles.
There's also this implication. I'll say this is a distortion because there's an implication that Martin Luther King Julius. Martin Luther King Julius. He made those delicious orange smoothies. Martin Luther King Jr. would not support quote unquote group rights is honestly preposterous. To say that King wouldn't support things like, affirmative action or, I don't know, like hate crime legislation or something. I mean, in King's book, Why We Can't Wait, in interviews and in quotes from those who knew him well, he is explicit about his support and advocacy for things like that. There was a point where he was being interviewed about some program that was being discussed, like, I forget, it was like giving each black family X amount of money. And he was like, well, that'd be cheaper than giving us lost wages for the last 200 years. So yeah, I support it, I mean, and if you actually read primary material from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., you would come to understand that his views on civil rights didn't end with the civil rights era. If he had his way, we would, I think, be much further along than we are now. It's very interesting that that a lot of conservatives, they'll always trot out Martin Luther King Jr. for his convenient "I have a dream" speech quotes out of context, but they'll never actually engage with the larger body of his work and how he really felt and what he really advocated for. So, yeah, just another like weird distortion. Oh, also, they fucking published this on Martin Luther King Jr. Day this year, which I find it very hard. I find it really hard to see that as a coincidence or an oversight. It feels deliberate, after reading this. Of course, there's no evidence of that, but that's how I feel. That's my feeling. And getting into this kind of more, they make some pretty, they make claims that like, group rights are bad, blah, blah, blah.
They basically use the fear word identity politics.
Yes, identity politics. And for people of this super conservative mindset, and this isn't to say that all conservatives have these views. There are plenty of conservatives who are conservative on like fiscal policy and infrastructure, but they're, they're a bit more liberal in terms of social and racial thoughts. So again, not making statements that all conservatives feel this way, but this sort of type of conservative, who wrote this report, very far right, they feel that your identity as a person, your race, gender, sexuality shouldn't matter. That everyone should be treated exactly the same. And, you might think, well, that sounds like it makes sense. And I think at a base level, it's pretty easy to agree with that, because it sounds like what you're saying is that you should evaluate people based on how they act, who they are, and such. But how someone acts and who they are isn't separate from their gender or race or how they live in the world, right? Their lived experience is uniquely informed by their gender or race or sexuality, and you can't separate that. So I just don't really know.
There's a doozy of a comparison they make about when they bring.
Please.
So this is kind of key to this line of thinking where they're trying to essentially scare you off the idea of identity politics by saying like it's the real racism, you see, because they're separating everyone into these different groups, and that's how you get these racist ideas. The comparison they make is that there was a South Carolina senator by the name of John C. Calhoun around Civil War-ish times.
Yep.
And he had a bunch of things where he had speeches or writings where he said, white people is better, y'all. It's just a fact that white people are better. And they make the comparison that people that partake in identity politics are the same as John C. Calhoun, you see, because both of them divided people into different groups. And it's like, this is not at all the same.
No,
John C. Calhoun was asserting the supremacy of a particular group amongst all others. He said this is true fact, while what they're calling identity politics is examining how different groups are treated under different systems in society and pointing out trends, let's say, in how people are treated. It is not saying that they are making the argument that because you are saying we need to treat different groups differently, that is the same as John C. Calhoun saying we must elevate the white man to the status of the highest rank in society. It is not. One is asserting dominance. The other one is saying, hey, these different groups tend to be treated differently under these systems.
Yeah, I mean, and I like to think about it this way. And I will say, as a personal note, when I was a lot younger, when I was a teenager, I didn't understand this kind of thing. I don't know about you, Chris, but I certainly thought treat everyone equally. Of course. Why would, that's the whole being colorblind. That was a big thing in the 90s, y'all. Any of y'all grew up in the 90s in America? Colorblind. We don't see color. Everyone's the same.
That's an actual colorblind, very confusing message there for me.
Chris was like, but I really don't, though.
Yeah.
Chris, yes, you are the god. You do not see the color. Chris should make all the laws. Is what the 90s U.S. federal government would think.
Please no.
But anyway, when I remember when I was younger, and I didn't have any black friends. I didn't have any indigenous friends. I didn't have any friends who were Latinx. I was around a bunch of white people, even though I was in a community with plenty of black people. Like most people, you just don't end up mixing, right? Because people are segregated, whether willfully or not. You know, and I didn't have that perspective as a kid. And I definitely didn't understand this sort of stuff until I got older. And, you know, not even that long ago, you know, I would say maybe over the last 10 years or so, I think I've really come to understand more what we really need for equality in this country and how that works. Because, you know, like I said, it's really tempting, right? To say, oh, treat everyone equally. But what is equal treatment is the question. And if your answer is give everyone the same thing, it doesn't actually work. So for example, let's say you go to the doctor, you know, Chris goes to the doctor and says, it's really weird. I can't see anything like at a certain distance. And they go, well, here you go. Have these glasses. And Chris goes, oh, these actually don't help. And they were like, well, those are the glasses we give out to everyone. That's just what you get. And Chris is like, okay, you know, and then like Chris falls off a building, you know, whatever. But, you know, it's like
common occurrence for me. I'm always falling off.
But no, it's like prescribing the same medicine for different people, right? I mean, even if you're talking about just actually administering medicine, you know, if I'm of a certain weight and height and gender, you're going to give me a certain amount of drug that you're not going to give Chris because he is of a different weight and height and gender, right? Like, and that's kind of how you have to think about racial, like systematic racism and stuff. And trust me, it can be hard sometimes. I still have, you know, that classic white person problem sometimes where I'll hear a person of color say something and I'll go, oh, that sounds really radical. I'll kind of balk at it. And then I have to go, no, wait, you should really listen to them. And I do. And I just feel like when you have this whole swath of the country that's like, hi, I'm being actively harmed and things are bad for this reason, you might want to listen to them, especially if you know that there are pre-existing things that could have probably caused them harm, like being a descendant of slaves, perhaps, or being descendants of immigrants who were, interred by the federal government a few decades ago. You know, I mean, it's a lot of layers and it is work to think through these things. I'm not saying this is easy. For any of you who don't agree, I really think that you should just just read some stuff by people you don't agree with. Talk to people who are maybe not white. I'm not going to say that every racial group is a monolith. Of course, like not all black folks or all Chinese folks or, what have you all think
Everyone
the
has
same
different
way.
Opinions about how different things should be done. I know plenty of Hispanic people that actually really dislike the Latinx thing.
Yeah.
So like that, that it could be good for some, could be good, not good for others. You kind of have to talk to as many different people as you can and feel out almost their individual experiences to get a better idea and do the work of how people would like to be treated.
Yeah. Anyway, I'm not a fucking scholar on racism or U.S. historian, but
no, we're not.
I'm just explaining that, your ideas about these things can change over time because I know mine did. And it can feel a little uncomfortable. And
you should be critiquing yourself and wondering, like, could I have done better? Should I be doing better? We should always be trying to do better.
Yeah. And that's kind of the key, right? If you're really sitting there going, racism doesn't exist, I'm done with that. Like, maybe readdress that.
I can't be racist because racist is for bad people and I'm not a bad person.
Yeah, that's an unfortunate comment.
Don't start there. Like, you have to just come from the point of it is possible for me to fuck up and do a bad thing, which does not render me entirely a bad person, as long as you're continuing to try to self-examine and see where you could have done something better. If you're just putting up these walls because you don't want to have hurt feelings, you're not going to get any better, which is true of nearly anything, not just like these kinds of things, like just your progress in anything. As we have seen from many authors of books here, if you put up a wall and don't respond to any criticism, you ain't gonna get any better.
Yeah, and I'm just gonna, actually, coincidentally, Ibram Kendi is the next person in my notes, just about a piece of his critique of the report, and I'm just gonna push once again that if you've never read Ibram Kendi's book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, or any of his work, I urge you to do so, even if you feel like maybe you don't agree with it. You want to talk about somebody who has fucking receipts and good citations, Kendi is your man. I just feel like his perspective and his approach to racism is that we've all been steeped in a racist culture for so long that we are all racist. And so what we must do is make the choice every day to do anti-racist things.
It's like brushing your teeth, right? Like you got to keep brushing the teeth. So the teeth are good.
And again, his statement is not just for white people. It is for literally all people, because you're not absolved of racist thinking, no matter what color, creed you are, class you are. It pervades everything in this country. So anyway, I really, really urge you to consider reading some of Kendi's work if you find yourself skeptical of this kind of thing. And let's talk about his critique. I just said I can't resist quoting Kendi's reaction to the report. This report makes it seem as if since the civil rights movement, Black people have been given privileges and preferential treatment in nearly every sector of society, which is news to Black people. Which is just like, And he continues, if we have commonly been given preferential treatment, over the last few decades, then why do Black people remain on the lower and dying end of nearly every racial disparity? Oh, are you trying to secretly dog whistle and say that, well, if we've given preferential treatment to Black people and they still aren't doing well, then perhaps they belong in the lower echelon of society? Because that's the undertone you're getting there.
Mm-hmm.
If you read between the lines, that's kind of, unfortunately, what you're seeing. And I mean, but again, I don't think, like Kendi's saying, it's not like that's necessarily true that Black folks have been given all of this preferential treatment and stuff. And I'm sure someone's going to jump in here with affirmative action. You can jump right back out. See you later. I'm too tired right now.
I don't read those YouTube comments too long. Honestly, if a YouTube comment goes for more than like one paragraph,
that's too long. I wouldn't even read after 2 lines.
If you've got something, like if you really have something to say, maybe send it in an email instead, or something, whatever. You know what? Whatever. Do what you want. You're allowed to post it, whatever. It's a public space. I'm not going to say you can't post it, but like, I'm probably not going to read it.
Yeah. YouTube comments are dead to me.
If you have a legitimate critique about the format of our show or what we could do better, that's not just you liberal assholes or you cucks that don't like guns, like the fucking Monster Hunter International YouTube comments, or
which
the
was funny because
why is Hoe Tactics the place where we get dragged the most by people looking to fight a free? Okay, here's my tangent rage moment of like y'all are trying to find a free audiobook, and then all of a sudden you're dragging us for daring to say, hey, maybe don't lie to people. Okay, anyway, that's a whole other topic.
YouTube is a hive of villainy. Moving on, there are many parts of this report where the authors are saying that critiquing the fact that the founding fathers, as they are called, of America owned human beings and enslaved them is actually worse than the enslavement itself. That is just wild to me. And to, I'm sure, many people who read this document. I'm just going to try to find some of those pieces where they actually say that because, here we go. My note is LMAO what? The most common charge leveled against the founders, and hence against our country itself, is that they were hypocrites who didn't believe in their stated principles, and therefore the country they built rests on a lie. This charge is untrue and has done enormous damage, especially in recent years, with a devastating effect on our civic unity and social fabric.
Basically saying if you critique the founding fathers about their slave ownership, then you're going to ruin the entire country because you're going to make people have divisions.
Yeah, that's just a very bizarre thing. And then actually, the sentence before that is, they actually talk about how the Constitution by design makes room for change. And that, sorry, I'll just read it verbatim. The Constitution has proven sturdy against narrow interest groups that seek to change elements of the Constitution merely to get their way. At the same time, it is important to note that by design, there is room in the Constitution for significant change and reform. Indeed, great reforms like abolition, women's suffrage, anti-communism, the civil rights movement, and the pro-life movement have often come forward that improve our dedication to the principles of the Declaration of Independence under the Constitution. And like, my dude, where is the pro-life movement or anti-communism enshrined in the Constitution or in any constitutional amendment? Am I forgetting some amendments here?
No, they're just trying to throw those in as like good and righteous movements that you should just accept as good and righteous without, really digging into it too much.
But the construction of those sentences makes you think that, like abolition, women's suffrage, and the civil rights movement, there are associated amendments for anti-communism and the pro-life movement, and I don't think that's true.
They're trying to Jedi mind trick you.
Yeah, it's that shit that really fucking kills me. Like, it's one thing if people have their conservative viewpoints that I don't agree with and don't support. It's another thing when they try to fucking trick people like that shit. That sucks. It's even worse. Oh, and then there's this whole thing that, like, slavery has been more the rule than the exception throughout human history. Yeah, cool, bro. I know. Why are we talking about it like it's... Oh, my God. And this is the part where they're just like, America, abolish slavery forever. The first and only ones. And it's like, I don't think... Okay. Oh, man. How did we get back to this point? Oh, my notes are funny sometimes.
I don't think, honestly, there's only maybe one or two more things here to bring up.
Oh, the shadow government sentence is worthy of a note. This isn't the section about how progressivism is bad. Right before the section about how fascism is bad and how progressives cause it? ? Based on this false understanding of rights, the progressives designed a new system of government. Hey, remember that last section I read about how the Constitution is actually designed for change and that we should change it sometimes? Instead of securing fundamental rights grounded in nature, government, operating under a new theory of the living Constitution, should constantly evolve to secure evolving rights. In order to keep up with these changes, government would be run more and more by credentialed managers who would direct society through rules and regulations that mold to the currents of time. They talk about this as though this is bad. This is a bad thing. I'm sorry, this is a bad thing.
Once again, it's the fact that they're like they need something immutable and constant to like hold on to as their anchor, or else like I said before, I think it's a true fear of change and the fact that the universe is chaos that we must constantly work against. They can't handle that thought, so there has to be something true and immutable for all time, for all things.
But like, why can't those things be life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness for everyone? Why does it have to? Why can't, like, I don't understand. Like, no one's saying that those things are bad. No one is saying that we're not doing that. Oh, it gets better. Far from creating an omniscient body of civil servants led only by pragmatism or science, these are in quotes, progressives instead created what amounts to a fourth branch of government, called at times the bureaucracy or the administrative state. This shadow government never faces elections and today operates largely without checks and balances.
Isn't the bureaucracy the executive branch that executes the one that does the things?
Yeah, I don't really know what they're getting. And they're also saying this shadow government that is the administrative state doesn't face elections? Like,
So
I mean,
the
I guess
judicial branch then.
Right, because I don't know, because the executive branch certainly appoints people. Like, people can certainly be appointed to positions and not elected to them, but that's kind of a regular part of our government. So
I think they're just saying the executive branch bad.
No, because they think there's a shadow government that doesn't get elected, so it's not the executive branch.
But I think that's what they think, because
But this report was commissioned by the executive branch.
That's what I said before, Paris. Like, if you can rage, like, it's really easy to rage about shadow governments when you're tweeting into the void, or you're Alex Jones with your, like, shitty radio show or something. But when you are the head of that whole government system, if you so desire, especially if they're unelected, and therefore you don't have to worry about, people electing these people, you could remove them. And then the shadow government problem wouldn't be a problem, would it?
And, if there were some citations here, it would be really helpful. Or if they were more specific, it would be very helpful.
No, the shadow government.
Oh, this is my favorite. I think I talked about this earlier. One of my favorite notes. Let me just read this to you. This is from the report. As one prominent progressive historian wrote in 1922, to ask whether the natural rights philosophy of the Declaration of Independence is true or false is essentially a meaningless question. Bro, who said it though? Which prominent progressive historian wrote that in 1922? Now I gotta fucking Google this shit. Also, why is it so bad? I'm sure, again, taken out of context, it sounds evil. Someone says that this, the natural rights in the Constitution, talking about whether it's true or false, is meaningless. Apparently, Carl Becker, I don't even know who Carl Becker is. Carl Becker was apparently writing that the government is not the source of our rights, that they are inherently inalienable and separate, which is what the fucking Constitution also says. Why? Why do you not like this conservative report?
Also, wasn't that what you were saying before, earlier in the report? Okay.
That's what I mean. It's they just don't know what they're doing. It's just like, it also asserts that progressives want to take old rights away as the country develops. What rights are progressives taking away? Please tell me. There's no example. There are zero examples. If you could at least provide me with an example, I could think about it and decide whether or not you're right. But if you don't give me an example, I have no reason to even consider your fucking point. Like, Jesus Christ. It's just...
All right. Paris, I think let's put a cap on this. We've spent more time on this than they did.
No, I have one more. This legacy from the Cold War, apparently, of anti-Americanism is by no means entirely a memory, but still pervades much of academia and the intellectual and cultural spheres. I.e. everything? I don't know. The increasingly accepted economic theory of socialism, while less violent than communism, is inspired by the same flawed philosophy and leads down the same dangerous path of allowing the state to seize private property and redistribute wealth as the governing elite see fit. I'm sorry. Do you not like the seizure of private property? Because I'm pretty sure you built most of the highway system by bulldozing black neighborhoods and native held land.
Yeah, there was before even that happened, there was the, marching Native Americans into like small reservations where they had to leave to live.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. I mean, what that really should say is allowing the state to seize private property of white people, yes, or people who are not white but subscribe to the tenets of white supremacy. Like, don't come at me with that anti-seizure of private property shit. Like, first of all, no one likes that. Second of all, you do it all the time, American government. Why are you over here trying to talk about things you already do? This is the whole fucking thing. They try to shit on an idea and like forget that that's something that they've done a bunch of, or just, I don't know, are unaware of it. I'm not really sure. Maybe they are unaware because none of these people are U.S. historians. Maybe they just don't know.
There's your cap. There's your cherry on top. Again, just... All right, Paris. Really, I like. We can't do every last bit, and the moles have been whacked. My arm is tired, Paris.
Both of my arms are broken and the moles are eating my face. That's how I feel. Do you know how much fucking reading I did for this and I still don't feel prepared even after the episode? I'm like, it's just so difficult to try to process so many things that are so complicated.
Oh, Paris, let's just get back to critiquing centaur porn instead. How about, that seems a little easier.
Hey, Chris. You know why progressives suck?
Why, Paris?
I don't know. Like, progressive ideas, like, gave women the right to vote. Like, now I gotta be responsible. I gotta fucking figure shit out and read and, do civics. I gotta go vote. Now, like, I don't know. I can only work, like, 5 days a week. It's really hard to work 7 days a week. Benefits, I gotta make choices. I could just go in the street and die, and now I gotta make choices about healthcare and vacation time. I gotta think about where I'm gonna go. I mean,
Paris, if you really think about it, the real monsters are your parents for giving you this mortal coil to begin with.
That's true. But now, like, progressives, I mean, I could have been earning money from the age of 7, but instead, I had to not work until I technically actually... I actually did have a job as a child, so maybe that's not a good example. It was illegal. But point being, you can thank progressives for the fact that your 7-year-old isn't fucking developing a lung condition because they're sweeping out chimneys or eating actual poison in their candy because of regulations that progressive ideas pushed.
They're stifling my business. I was just filling the candy with delicious bleach filler. It was working fine. I was making money.
And you were eating the candy. The kids liked it until they were dead. It was good up until the last drop. But no, just the concept that any progressive, i.e., I don't know, different, like, forward-thinking idea.
Someone who's advocating that, hey, maybe we could do a little better about this.
Yeah,
can we try something different?
Why is it so... Yeah, so anyway, if you like a lot of modern day laws and comforts, you can thank those evil progressives.
All right, Paris. Can we fix it? No. Throw the whole thing out.
Actually. No, I mean, because, like, look, I'm not going to sit here and say, like, you can never... people are going to have conservative views. People are going to not like, my ideas about history and culture. Sure. But I think we can all get on board with the fact that, like, this could have been better fact-checked, right? Even if it did have a conservative leaning, it could have had the facts checked. It could have had citations and examples, showing what they were talking about, when saying things like, our society is being ruined, shadow government. It's like, man, at least, people
at least
like...
show me one shadow bureaucrat.
Yeah, I mean, I just need an example. So again, I can't really engage with your idea if you're not showing me. If you're just telling me, it doesn't really work. I mean, and again, like, hire actual U.S. historians if you're writing a report about U.S. history. I mean, there have to at least be a few on there. And like Chris said at the top of the show, there are plenty of conservative U.S. historians. I mean, you could have found somebody that at least shared some of your views, right? Maybe just don't try to squeeze hundreds of years of history into 20 pages. I think this commission would have been better served if they would have just critiqued the things in the 1619 project that they took issue with. Like things that weren't accurate or that they didn't like the framing of. At least then it would have been pointed. It would have made sense for it to be 20 pages, and they could have provided, I don't know, it just would have made more sense. If this was a petty, revenge spite report, like just address the things that you're mad about in the thing you're mad about. Don't just make this whole other separate thing off in fucking conservative fantasy land where there's no fact checking and no, shit taken out of context everywhere. It's just really could have been structured differently. and at least would have been serviceable as a written document. So
yeah,
that's my really generous
some tips
take.
for you guys. Try again. Try next time. Okay. That's that, right? So here's the end of the show stuff. And we should start with a thank you to the patrons. We hit a milestone recently.
We did.
And that milestone is that we're now pulling in $100 a month on Patreon. Big money. It's
the 23 project. We now have 23 patrons.
Thank you, but seriously, sincerely thank you. Getting into the triple digits like that, we really kind of didn't expect to begin with to ever happen. And with that comes the promise that we made way back when, that patrons that have been with us at this level will receive something. We're still kind of ironing that out. We're waiting for new art. And then once we have that art, we're going to put it on something that we'll send to each of you. Ideally, it's something that's small or light. So we're thinking like a t-shirt, a phone holder thing, maybe pencils. I don't know. Something that's reasonably mailable. If you have an idea for an item that you feel particularly strongly about, let us know. You can message us directly or send us an email. Also, if you are a current patron, make sure we have your address. We can't mail you fun, free stuff if we don't know where you live. So please make sure we have your address. Thank you. Thank you to our patrons. It's a long list. It's getting longer. All right. Thank you, Dari. Thank you, Greg. Thank you, Veronica, Will, D, Jared, Lynn, Sinya, Yakub, Bobby Blackcat, Jensina, Mayo Cat, Elliot, Kieran, Martin, Jay, Scott, Luchek, CTAP1, Miri, and our newest patrons, Junka or Yunka, not quite sure how to say that, Jay. Let me know if that's right. Robert Allen Cook III. Oh, distinguished.
Fancy. And David. Thank you.
Oh, sorry, David. After Robert Allen Cook III, it's a little less good.
Yeah, sorry about that. I probably should have... I put them in order of when they signed up. David's just the most recent. I probably should have reordered that. Anyway, Janka, Yanka, Robert Allen Cook III, and David, thank you so much for providing us with the showering of new patronage. It's wonderful.
I know.
Pushed us over the mark. Oh yeah, I also want to shank. Wow.
Who do you want to shank, Paris? Jeez.
This happens with my mouth and my brain. There's like a disconnect sometimes where I switch the beginnings of two words that I want to say in succession. I don't know what that's called, but there's probably something broken in my mind. I was trying to say, I'd like to thank Luchek, and then I just said shank or shank. Thank patron Luchek for actually upping his patronage. So thank you, good sir. Much appreciated.
That's what you get when you up your patronage, a shanking from
a verbal shanking because my mind broke. Sorry. But no, really, thanks to all of you. If you also want to help support the show, you can subscribe on YouTube. You literally click the button one time. You've done the thing. Or you can donate $1, $5, or $10.
I thought you were going to say, like, you dumb fuck.
No. You can donate some money to us on Patreon. If you donate $5 a month or more, you get access to a bunch of bonus content. So that's like videos of us, outtakes, and other random audiovisual weirdness. You can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and Goodreads if you are on those platforms. Most importantly, though, if you could share the show on social media or tell someone about it, that'd be really cool. You could also write a review for us. Also nice. We've gotten some more reviews lately, and we'd like to get more of them so we can read them on the show to properly thank you.
Oh, actually, why don't you can also email us. We like your emails, and there was one really good email that we got. Do you remember the good email with the orange cat? Oh my
God, the cat email. Who was? Are we allowed to say who they were?
Let's save that. I don't know. Like, if they want a special shout out, maybe we'll say it again. But someone sent us a very lovely email talking about how much they love the show, and they added pictures of their orange cat.
Oh, man, that was great. I think that might be the best the best fan email we've ever gotten, or message.
Yes.
It was awesome. Really appreciated the cat. I also feel like we got that on a day where I was like not feeling super hot. So I was like, this is awesome. This is really nice. They were super great. I think they said something about how they were like saving up the back catalog because they didn't want to run out of episodes. And I was like, oh my God, I know how that feels with shows that I love.
Just to be fair, like, it gets worse the more backwards you go. So
yeah.
Like, those early.
Yeah.
The other way around.
Remember how I said that, like, I've changed a lot in the last few years? That actually...
You can hear it.
Might I... Yeah. You can be there in real time as I fuck up and say really dumb shit like 6 years ago. But anyway, yeah, thanks so much for that email. Pro tip, if you send us fan mail, definitely send pictures of pets. Fun.
Yes.
Super fun.
We
love animals.
Yes. They're all great. They're all like whatever kind of pet you have that you are treating nicely and you have very nice, beautiful photos of. I would like to see them.
Yeah. Also, like, I don't know, photos of creative projects. You know, I don't know. Maybe you listen to us while you knit. Show us your knitting. Show us your fun stuff. It makes us feel pretty good. Whew. Thanks for sitting with us through this. I know this was kind of just believe it or not, I actually have structured notes and did hours of reading to prepare for this episode, and I just still feel like I failed. I don't know. It's just, again, we're not historians. It's hard.
I was stoned and full of banh mi this whole episode, so, different ways of approaching things.
The 1776 Commission Report. So bad, Chris had to eat Vietnamese food until he was immobile and then get really high.
No, that was before. I did it before, and then... Weed makes food taste better. I don't know if you knew that, Paris.
No, I actually don't. I mean, weed makes me nauseous, so I don't think I'll ever experience that, unfortunately.
No.
Yeah, sorry, this wasn't...
Two different lived experiences.
Yeah, it's almost like not everything is the same for every person.
Okay.
Really interesting.
There you
idea.
go. There's the little knot on top of this present that we give to you, listeners. So enjoy your gift. We've got more for you coming in 2 weeks because that's how this works. So until then, unless you got something to say, Paris.
Yeah, I remember how I was talking about emailing us. I kind of forgot to tell you our email. It is terriblebookclub@gmail.com.
Yeah, that's where you can send those pet pics.
Send your pets.
All right, Paris, with that, see you next time. Bye.
Bye.